Hello, everyone. I'm June Blotnick, the Executive Director of Clean Air NC, and we are happy to be sponsoring this series on energy with the Sierra Club and Nancy LaPlaca, our energy expert. This is the last session out of 6. This one is on building a clean energy future. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nancy, but thank you all so much for joining us, and we do welcome your feedback.
Yeah,
Nancy?
thanks so much, June and Andrew and Kelly and Kathy and the staff at Clean Air NC and the Sierra Club folks who've helped to sponsor this. So let's move to slide 2 here, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. As we've said before, the chat box is always open. Please type in your questions. We've got Kathy Buckley from Apple who's watching that. All the slides and all the webinars are available on demand at the Clean Air NC website, including the speaker's notes and all the links. We want this to work for you, so feedback is welcome. There's my email, or you can always find me by Googling my name, and I'm happy to speak with you if you've got a couple questions about your particular situation. So moving to slide 3 here. This is the last session, and again, we're not going to be doing a duplicate session at 5:30, but Clean Air NC will post this ASAP. So today is building a clean energy future. And I've got a lot of slides because I want to give people a lot of info. And so I'm going to be moving through them pretty fast. So let's go to the next slide here, slide 4, Andrew. Here's our agenda. And I'm going to talk a little bit about who's in charge, just so that people understand where we can put pressure to get more clean energy. And again, it's the North Carolina Utilities Commission that has a lot of power, the governor who has a lot of power, and of course, the institutions with the most power that are the electric utilities. And in North Carolina, that's Duke Energy. And I want to make clear here, as it says in slide 4, that the obstacles are not cost or technology. They are absolutely not. And they haven't been for some time. The obstacles are politics, money, and the undue influence of incumbents, which is actually getting more and more attention around the country. I want to go into which states are best and worst and why, because it's instructive to see which states are making headway. And a lot of times when it comes to solar, it's not the states that you would think. It's not the sunny states. It's the less sunny states at this point in time, because unfortunately in many sunny states, clean energy policies have been pretty much squished. So then finally at the end, we're going to get specific to North Carolina because we want people to know what can they do. We've got a recent order on Duke Energy's Integrated Resource Plan that we'll talk about. We have the new SEAM, which stands for the Southeast Energy Market, which was approved by FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that we'll get into. And then we have recent proposed changes to net energy metering in Duke Energy territory in North Carolina. So let's go here to slide 5, Andrew. And, who's in charge and what can we do to get more clean energy? Let's go to slide 6 here. And as I said earlier, utilities are clearly the biggest influencers. I mean, the money, the influence, the trade groups, the political spending, the campaign spending, the spending on community groups, and with Duke Energy's foundation arm is just enormous. The governor has a lot of power, and the NCUC has a lot of power, and we're very lucky in North Carolina. We have quite an educated, smart, really incredibly competent NCUC, and they have an enormous influence of what gets built and what doesn't get built, and more than that, what gets counted and what doesn't get counted. Because as we know well, pollution doesn't get counted. Lack of pollution doesn't get counted. Environmental justice doesn't get counted. I also want to point out here in slide 5 that There are serious consequences due to lack of oversight and poor planning. You know, here in Duke Energy territory, the Dan River spill started the whole discussion about coal ash, how we weren't even looking at coal ash. We've got failed, abandoned nuclear power plants, which literally run into $40 billion across the United States. Duke Energy has a number of abandoned nuclear plants. One in North Carolina that's abandoned. They spent about $500 million on. It's $500 million. That's quite a lot. I want to mention Duke Energy's $3.4 billion clean coal plant called Edwardsport. And what this tells us in North Carolina, why we care about that, is because Duke Energy knows that carbon capture and sequestration doesn't work. They know that clean coal has been a failure. So Duke Energy knows this is not news to them. So moving on here to slide 7, look at this, look at the green, that green line. This is a report from NREL, and there's the link. And basically, in order to reduce emissions the way that we need to address climate, we have to do it a lot. That green is really the minimum that we need to do if we want a habitable planet. And you can see that if we actually hit 95% reduction by 2035, that blue line, that is very, very steep. We could do this if we chose to. So moving to slide 8 here, I want to mention a little bit of the global transition. And then if we move to slide 9, Andrew, if you could show that GIF, that GIF or GIF. Thanks, Andrew. And this shows solar development across the world by country. And you can see how quickly this is moving. 2001, 2002, and look at how these countries are changing places. Japan and Germany. And then, you know, and we're going to see China really move up here. So you can see just in solar generation, how much it's changed over the last 20 years is just staggering. And you see Germany was a leader for a very long time, Italy. Now the US is moving up again in 2015, now China. And you will see when we get to the end of this that China is really the leader by quite a lot at this point in time. So, okay, let's move on then to the next slide, which is slide 10. And I want to show this because, you know, we really do have a long way to go in terms of not just the US, but the whole globe. And this is global energy use. And it's almost easy to get discouraged if you look at this, but when you realize that we could change our energy sources to clean energy very quickly. And then once you start moving in automobiles and run them on electricity, on clean electricity, you can see just how quickly this could change very fast. So let's go to the next slide here, Andrew, slide 11. And what I wanted to show by this slide is that if you look at far right, power sector, 27% is renewable energy. They're also counting hydro, which skews things. But the bottom line with this for me is we can rapidly change power and also heating and cooling. And so heating and cooling right now in this country is done with either electricity or natural gas, pretty much. And so basically, if we started changing, if we got serious about our energy efficiency spending, about changing the heat pumps, and then running everything on renewable energy, we could make very quick progress. So slide 11 here, Andrew, thank you for advancing this. I wanted to show this solar power by country in 2021. And you can see that Germany is a big leader. They always have been, and they have been since the Energiewende, which was a law that they passed in 1999 that basically subsidized clean energy so that they were very, very early leaders in solar. Now, the other thing to remember when you look at maps or when you look at the amount of solar is that, for example, China is way bigger than Germany, right? China is way bigger than the United States. So when you look at the amount in megawatts or gigawatts, remember that that needs to be relative to the country's overall electricity generation and or population. So next slide here, Andrew, slide 13, we see that China has 254,000 megawatts of power. That's 254 gigawatts. And I put some resources there, IRENA, REN 21, which is Renewable Energy 21, and IEA, which is the International Energy Association, not the EIA, which is US. The other thing I want to mention about the IEA is that they have been very clear that solar energy is now the cheapest and that we have to reduce fossil fuel use. There's a gentleman there who's one of the leaders of the IEA named Fatih Birol. That's Fatihbirol. He has been very clear, one of the clearest voices on the planet about the need to reduce fossil fuel use. So let's go to slide 14 here and move to the United States. Let's see. And June, do we have any questions? This is a good place to break. Or Kathy?
Not yet, Nancy.
Thank you. Okay, so let's move to slide 15 here. I've showed this a few times, and it's basically the electricity mix in the US. So we have a lot of fossil gas. Coal has really gone down, and nuclear has stayed about the same, and it probably will for a while. We're about 10% wind now. Things are, generations coming on so quickly that even these websites that try to keep up are behind. And solar, this says is 2.3%, but if you count local solar, rooftop solar, it's about 3.3, 3.4%. So slide 16, the next one, I love this slide because look at that decline in coal since just 2010. That is an unbelievably steep decline that really people said 15 years ago, oh, that can't ever happen. But it's happened, and it's happening, and it's continuing to decline. And the next slide here, slide 17, this one shows that most of our solar in the United States is utility scale. Small scale solar is much smaller, but it's a very, very valuable and much needed segment, and one that can benefit from a lot of growth. That's where dockets like the net metering discussion that we're having in North Carolina and in many states, that's where this small scale solar can really make a big difference. Do not underestimate the opportunities with medium-sized solar, like on businesses and Whole Foods or Staples or, you know, Costco or Walmart, et cetera. So next slide, slide 18, you can see that the data on this is November 2021. Solar generation was 3% of US electricity in 2020, but we project it to be 20% by 2050. That's EIA. I'd say that's way, way, way low. And the EIA has been notoriously pro-fossil fuels and notoriously slow in recognizing how quickly the US can implement clean energy. So let's move to slide 19 here. And I wanted to show this map, and here's a link, and it's got a lot of great info on it if you want to understand solar in different parts of the country. And I circled North Carolina's capacity factor. So capacity factor, as I've mentioned in a couple other presentations, is really important because what that tells us is how many hours in a year is your solar going to generate electricity. Now, there's two things that make a big difference in that. Well, a couple things, actually. Let's say three. One is solar insolation. How much solar is your state getting? And I just want to talk briefly about the difference between the West Coast and the East Coast, because we have so much more moisture in our air. The capacity factor is less because when you're in the West and though that solar electricity is hitting the panel and it's not getting refracted by water vapor, you get more solar electricity per watt. In fact, that's why it's so amazing that You know, North Carolina actually has more solar than Arizona right now, considering that if you look at the number in Arizona, 27% capacity factor versus North Carolina, 19.8. So we have good solar insolation, 19.8. Some of that is because instead of just having fixed panels, we have single axis trackers that follow the sun. When you follow the sun, you get more electricity production, right? So let's go to slide 20 here. And if you want to become a solar nerd, go to the DSIRE USA website. It's at NC State, which we can be really proud of here in North Carolina. It's an excellent, excellent organization and group of people who do outstanding research. And they've been doing it there for, I think, 30 years. And they have quite a amazing array of reports and experts. And this particular map, I gave a link to the maps in the speaker's notes. I want people to notice the Southeast. It's white. Why? Because we don't have very many states with binding targets. And if you went through these states, you would see that our target is low. When it was put in place in 2007, it was high. Now it's not, it's low. So these maps, we're going to look at a few other of these maps from DSIRE, but I encourage you to go to that link and check out the summary maps because they're very good. So let's go to slide 21, Andrew. And this is a map from NREL, but it's linked to a map to a article that was written by the commercial solar guy who really also does a lot of collecting and disseminating information and just sort of summarizing it. Another good person to follow. And I want people to notice, you can see by color, the darker the color, the more the solar percentage, but also notice that I want to point out something that can be confusing. So if you look at North Carolina, we're right there, what does it say, 7.3%? But if you ask Duke Energy how much solar they have, it's less than that. Why? Because we export a fair amount of solar to the Northeast. Why? And who's doing that? Well, honestly, it's mostly Duke Energy. It's a lot of Duke Energy owned solar. And why do they export it? Because they get more money. Because outside of North Carolina, places like Washington, D.C., the PJM market, which is a market just north of us, they have been compensating solar electricity at much higher rates. And so what does Duke do? Well, they sell there and they get more money. And they, you know, we should be able to use all of the methods that Duke Energy can use. Why can't we? They get it because they know how to, you know, basically game the system to their advantage. So let's go to the next slide here, 22. I want to spend a couple of some extra minutes on these slides because I want to show people some of these incredible, incredible resources that are out there. The link to this report is in the speaker's notes. This is Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And this is a report that is very recent. And I want to show people a couple things about this. So this is wind, which I put in pink because I don't want you to mix it up with solar. So let's look at Iowa here. So Iowa, it says 2020 wind generation as a percentage of in-state generation. Look at Iowa, they're 57.3%. But then look at across as a percentage of in-state sales, it's 68.6. Well, what's going on here? Well, what's going on is that Iowa is importing about 10% of their total electricity as wind, or let's just say 11 and a half, it looks like. So that's why when you're really going to take a hard look at clean energy and at electricity, you need to understand that some of it's in-state and some of it's imported. So let's take a look at Kansas. So you see Kansas right below Iowa there as a percentage of in-state generation, 43%. But if we look at the right, as a percentage of in-state sales, it's 61%. Why? Because they're importing wind. Okay, now let's move to solar. Let's go to slide 23. And I put in a couple of extra circles there. because Jennifer Roberts pointed out some really important items. So let's look at the red first, okay? So look at North Carolina. And this title, column title, is a little bit different. Solar generation as a percentage of in-state generation. And on the left there, you've got all solar. And on the sort of middle left, you've got utility scale only. So let's just look at North Carolina. So all solar as a percentage of in-state generation, you've got 5.7% there. The data is probably a little bit older than the previous slide. But if you look at that utility scale solar only, it's 5.7. So the difference between not utility scale and utility scale is only 0.2%. Why? Because we have so few solar rooftops in North Carolina. We only have 25,000 solar roofs. That's not very many. In a state with so much solar, 7 gigawatts of solar, we have very, very few roofs. That is not smart, frankly. If we want to be resilient, if we want to encourage solar plus batteries, we need rules that are going to encourage rooftop solar, not discourage rooftop solar, because we don't have hardly any rooftop solar relative to other states. Now let's look at a couple of other of these. Let's look at Massachusetts right there. So all solar in Massachusetts is a stunning 13.7% of generation. They're not exactly sunny, right? But then look at utility only, 4.9%. Well, that means that the difference between the 4.9 utility scale and the 13.7 overall is rooftop solar. So wait a second, Massachusetts, certainly no sunnier than we are, they have a whole lot of rooftops. Or look at Hawaii. Utility scale solar is 2.4%, but total solar, 12.6%. Why? Because they have a lot of rooftop solar. Why does Hawaii have so much rooftop solar? When the utilities there fought it for a number of years, it's because electricity in Hawaii is some of the most expensive in the country, and it always has been. Why? It's an island. All that fuel, all that oil, all that coal, all that gas, it has to get shipped in. And so the cost of electricity in Hawaii has been over 30 cents a kilowatt hour for a very long time. And so solar electricity in Hawaii was one of the very first places in the United States where it was cost competitive. Because when you're paying 30 cents a kilowatt hour for coal power or gas power or oil power, solar is a real good deal. So it's interesting, and this is why I think that we really need to fight for better net metering rules than Duke is proposing. So let's go to slide 24. And this is just a little bit more up to date. And my point in showing you this is that North Carolina, look at the North Carolina numbers. In 1 year, we literally jumped 2 whole percentage points as a percentage of in-state generation. So you remember the last slide was like 5.5%, 5.7%. Well, in only 1 year, we jumped 2 percentage points. I mean, this can happen. And this is actually with pretty bad solar rules, really, relative to what they could be. And then look up here at Massachusetts and Hawaii again. These are big jumps. These are big jumps. So let's go to the next slide here, which is states that are getting electricity from renewable resources. And I think what I like about this slide is that it shows you in the blue is wind, the yellow is solar, and you can see that California has a lot of wind. They used to have a lot of hydro. It's way down now, of course, with the drought. But they also have a lot of solar. And then look at Texas, which has a lot of renewables. Well, they have a lot of wind, not a lot of solar, but it's really starting to grow. And then you can see Washington, New York, Oregon have a lot of hydro. And then if you go down here to North Carolina, we have a lot of solar relative to other types of generation. Okay, so let's take a little bit deeper dive into states that are doing good policies and bad policies. And when I say good and bad, I mean pro renewables, pro clean energy, pro fighting climate change. So let's look at slide 26 here. And before I do that, Kathy, do we have any questions?
Yeah, David asks, is converting RPSs to CESs a good state level goal?
Well, that's an interesting question. It depends on the definitions, okay? So what the nuclear industry has tried to do over and over and over, but they were unsuccessful. They may have been successful in one state or two. I'm not sure. I haven't really looked at it. But yeah.
Before you answer the question, if you could just define the terms RPS.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy. So RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standard. It can also be called a REST, Renewable Energy Standard and Technology or whatever. So basically that is the goal that is set by either the regulators or the legislature that says you have to get X% of your electricity from clean energy. That's a renewable energy standard or renewable portfolio standard. Now, a clean energy standard is, it's about the same thing. It's sort of semantics. But here's where the rubber hits the road. What is defined as clean? For example, here in North Carolina, we're defining swine waste electricity as clean, whereas really there's many, many arguments that say it's not at all. I believe that we even called burning tires clean. Now that's ridiculous. The nuclear industry has tried to call nuclear energy clean. So if you did that in a state like Arizona, which they tried to do that in Arizona, you wouldn't need one more bit of solar because they have a giant nuclear power plant, 4,000 megawatts. So the devil's in the details, unfortunately. So when you say a clean energy standard, like we're talking about at the federal level, what counts as clean? And so if what we're doing by counting nuclear as clean, if we're reducing the uptake of renewable energy, I'd say that's a bad idea because our uptake of renewable energy ain't that great so far. We're at 3%. So what? That's not very good. Really, we could have done so much better. California as a state is between 20 and 30% solar electricity generated from solar. Germany is 40% renewable energy, solar and wind. I mean, we are behind. And so I would say, watch for the definitions. So let me move here to slide 26 if we don't have any more questions, Kathy.
Yeah, just a clarification. David was thinking you said that rooftop solar is better than utility, but I think you were really saying not having rooftop is not a good thing.
Yes, I am saying that. And I would say both and. And there are some people who I really, really respect who say distributed is better than utility. That's a perfectly valid point, I think. There are some who say utility is better, and you know who it is? It's utilities. Why? Because they want to own it. So there is a natural tendency in the market to devalue distributed generation. Why? Because of politics, because of market power, because who has more market power? Duke Energy, who spends $80 million a year in North Carolina on, influence from campaign contributions to donations to Little League? Or is it the mom and pop solar guy who's just trying to get by? And this is true in every single state. So basically we have a baked in tendency because of the market to the big players push for utility scale. So this brings us to Minnesota. Slide 26. You won't look at any other state that has that green except Minnesota. Why? Because in 2013 and 2014, Minnesota passed a great law that really incentivized community solar. In fact, what's interesting is it was passed in 2013 or 2014. And because the utilities fought it so much, it took years for that solar to actually get built and be on the ground. But look at that green. Look at how much community solar there is. It's staggering. It's stunning. So let's go to the next state, 27, which is Illinois. And I'm actually doing some work right now in Illinois, and it's their bill is fantastic. And look at Illinois. So what's amazing about Illinois is look at 2020, a tiny bit of utility owned solar, right? You know, a fair amount of community solar. It's sold out in like weeks. It's sold out in weeks. And then look at that yellow. This is very interesting. This is what we should aspire to. This is a thriving commercial solar market, which you really won't see in very many other places, because the RPS that they passed, it was called, in 2016, it was called FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act. They focused on the commercial market. And so they got a lot of solar built in the commercial market. And then look how big the residential market is. It's huge relative to other types of solar. In fact, it's exact opposite of what you're going to see in most states, where there's a tiny amount of residential solar like us and a huge amount of utility solar. So let's look at the next slide, because I want to show you what happens year to year in the solar market. Okay, so this is from Lawrence Berkeley Labs, but I found it at the Commercial Solar Guys website. There's the link. So look at this column I have circled. Solar PV growth from prior year. Well, I'm sorry I didn't include the year, but it's the last, 8-10 years. So look at some of these years where solar was growing great guns. This is, 8-10 years ago. And it really slowed down in the last couple of years. So really, this is the influence of the utilities working overtime to kill solar. That's basically what it is. So let me move to something a little bit more hopeful. Slide 29. And this is that most planned storage in the next 3 years is to be paired with solar. And the effect that this will have on the solar market cannot be underestimated. And this is why it's so important to push for good net metering. Because if you combine good net metering with batteries, all of a sudden you have solar plus batteries that are bigger than the sum of their parts, as Union of Concerned Scientists, energy nerd and incredible expert Joe Daniel tells us. And I will get to that slide at the end. So here's why. Because you can take that solar that you've got and you can stick it in a battery and use it when you need it. So this cannot be underestimated. And this is why also we have to fight for the commercial market, for the community solar market, for that mid-size market, because imagine the effect that you can have with a 0.5 gigawatt of solar on a couple of schools and a battery versus basically killing that market. So let's go to slide 30 here. And I had this in the last presentation, but when the IEA, the International Energy Association, which, for the last however many years it's existed, which I'm sure is at least 50, probably, when they tell you that solar is the cheapest electricity in history, you should sit up and take notice. Because this is a group that has basically been dominated by fossil fuels for all of their history. So let's look at the next slide, slide 31. This is from NREL. NREL is so incredible. This is a great report if you take a look at it. And I took this one slide because what gobsmacked me about this slide is, look at these 3 markets, okay? You can compare the cost of residential PV to the cost of commercial PV and the cost of utility PV. Now, obviously, utility PV is cheaper because of economies of scale, although the cost is different than the value, because the value of solar is location, location, location. So let's, especially in a grid outage or for resilience purposes. And so there are many, many studies out there that are saying that, yes, even though utility scale solar is less than half the cost of residential, let's just say it's 2.5 times cheaper, it's half the cost, the locational value of that distributed generation is huge. Here's the other thing. Look at the orange. See that orange? That's soft costs. That's permitting and stuff like that. We make it hard in this country to put up solar. We make it hard. Germany doesn't have that giant thing of soft costs. Neither do other countries. We do. Why? Because we have a balkanized energy system where energy policy is made state by state, and the utilities go in there and they kill good distributed policy state by state. That is what they do. And so look at that orange. Many, many countries have almost eliminated that orange, right? On the far right there, the residential. If we could cut that down by 2/3, it would be not much more expensive than utility scale. So this is our challenge. So this is why we have to fight for net metering. We have to fight for good net metering policy in North Carolina. Don't just give it up to Duke. So next slide here, slide 32. This is from Lazard, who is a financial and also known in the energy nerd world as publishing every year an incredible analysis on LCOE. And again, what's LCOE? Levelized cost of electricity over its lifetime. And let me explain why this is so important. There was a period of time in Arizona where I lived and worked for many years on solar, where the utility said, we're only going to count the value of solar, the generation value of solar for 5 years. So that natural gas plant or that nuclear plant or that coal plant, we're going to give an LCOE of 20 years or 30 years. But for solar, we're only going to give it 5. Well, what happened? They killed the value of solar. And that is indeed why Arizona spent about 5, 6, 8 years basically just killing solar. So LCOE is important here in slide 32 because what we don't include is very important. What don't we include? Well, we don't include all those horrible health damages from environment, from coal ash, from pollution, mercury, air quality, asthma. We don't include jobs. We don't include environmental justice. We don't include coal ash spills. We don't include nuclear waste. The list is so long. It is very, very long. And who is bearing those costs? We are, our communities are. So let's go to slide 33 here. Battery storage is 30% cheaper than gas peaker plants for firming renewables. And I showed this before because I think it's so important. And this is from Australia. It's not the United States, but the sun shines all over the globe and shines here and in Australia. And what they found in this study is that when you compare the cost of a gas peaker plant, 250 megawatts, remember, gas peakers only run 1 to 5% of the hours in a year. When you compare that to a 250 megawatt 4-hour battery and a 2-hour battery, the cost savings it's 17% cheaper for the 2-hour battery and 30% cheaper for the 4-hour battery. Why? Because when you build a gas peaker, you're building this giant power plant to only run 1 to 4 to 5% of the hours in a year. What else are you building when you get that gas peaker plant? Well, you need a pipeline. I saw one Duke Energy power plant where to add natural gas to an old coal plant, it was $200 million just for the pipeline, completely under the radar because there was no hearing, totally under the radar. So these are real costs that we are not counting, that really, frankly, it's insane not to count them. So let's go to slide 34 here on some hopeful. This is a hopeful note. These are progressive states that are starting to set energy storage targets. Because here's the thing with energy storage. We will make it or break it by the Public Utilities Commission decisions. And that's why it's so important to get involved in the PUCs. And I remember hearing a really smart guy named Shail Khan, who was the battery solar guy for SIA for many, many years and Green Tech Media. And basically what he said was, if we in this country have energy storage policies at public utilities commissions that kill storage, it's going to take 5 years longer than it should. And indeed, he was right. And so all those Trump years and all these years that the utilities have basically succeeded in squishing good policy, we are not where we should be. The good news is that the cost of storage is way, way, way down. And in fact, in my home here, which in New River Light and Power territory in Boone, the rules are so awful for solar that we're putting up solar and batteries, and we have high efficiency heat pumps. And so pretty soon we're going to be able to really be able to compare what we spent for propane and fossil fuel electricity versus solar and storage. And that's just going to keep happening more and more, because as the cost of these technologies come down, the utilities are frankly going to have to work harder and harder at manipulating policy to fit them. So let's go to the next slide here, slide 35. Clean energy in North Carolina, what up? As my stepkids used to tell me when they were young, what up? So slide 36 here, let's look at North Carolina. And the link is in the speaker's notes, and it's some great charts from NPR and Visual Capitalist about which states have clean energy more and less. And I include this because, and I've said this a few times in other presentations, but look how fast North Carolina ditched coal. So there in 2004, North Carolina was 61% coal. By 2014, it was down to, let's say, 39%. And now it's like, now it's there, it says 14%, 15% last year. Now it's supposed to go up this year, but at any rate, you can see how fast we can go down. And then similarly, natural gas in 2004 was 2%. It was 2%. And now it's about, 40%, depends on the month and the year, but it's getting up there. So let's go to slide 37. And this is also a very hopeful slide I stole from NCSEA. And it shows that our solar in this state is all over the place, which is really good. Every county's benefiting. In fact, every county except mine, which is Watauga up there in the corner. But every county is benefiting. And honestly, Watauga County, one of the reasons why we have no solar is because our rules are terrible. New River Light and Power is terrible. Blue Ridge Electric is terrible. The rules just basically are solar killing. So let's look at slide 38 here. And look at slide 38. Look at that blue, that sort of sky blue. That is utility scale solar. Now that tells you who is driving the bus on solar in North Carolina. Duke Energy. Who's driving the bus 99% of the time? Duke Energy. Look at our residential. We don't even have hardly any. Community, none. Duke Energy made some available a few years and no one has taken advantage of it. Why? Because it doesn't make any economic sense. And it was only 20 megawatts a year or something ridiculous for a state that has like a total of like 35,000 megawatts. It was 20 megawatts. And then look at the commercial scale. It's non-existent. This is what we need to change. So let's look at slide 39. And this is from SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, which it's one of my go-to places for when I want to see what's going on in a state. It's just about the first place I go. Because what that will tell me if I care about solar is how much is installed. And you could see, this was, when did they do this? I think this was, I'm not sure which quarter this was. Anyway, solar installed 7,228 megawatts, enough to power 846,000 homes, right? But look at the bottom. How many homes are we actually powering? 24 or 25,000. Why? Because our net metering rules are so bad. So we have enough solar to theoretically run that many homes. But how many homes do we actually have with solar? Not that many. Okay, percentage of state's electricity from solar. Again, there's the 7.8. But if you look at Duke, there are probably around 6, maybe 7 right now. Well, what's the difference? The difference is that we export that solar, a lot of it to DC, because they had such great solar rebates that Duke Energy was the first one to go in there, and hoover them up. So basically you could see also that our total solar investment in the state is 9.8 billion. Actually, according to RTI, it's more than that, but it's a lot. So let's go to the next slide, 40. And I've showed this before. These are jobs. These are the counties that have the most solar jobs. Why? Because Duke Energy has retail net metering right now. And so that's where the solar jobs are. So let's look at slide 41. Here in North Carolina, you can see the numbers. I'm sure they're much higher by now. And I use this to show my town council, because I'm on the town council in Boone until today, actually the end of the day. And my county, Watauga, we have like 6 solar jobs because their solar policies are terrible again. But you can see in the places where you have good solar policies, you have a lot of jobs. So let's go to the next slide, 42. And I didn't really do this study justice here in these slides. This is the most recent study by RTI. And we should all thank NCSEA for something that they do every couple of years. They commission the Research Triangle Institute to do an incredible study on clean energy investment in North Carolina. It's one of the best I've ever seen in 15 years of work. They slice it and dice it all these different ways, and they tell you by county, and they tell you property tax, and they tell you all kinds of interesting, valuable information. And when I was reviewing this, and June and I checked it out, and I looked at their most recent, I couldn't believe the difference in the numbers. So if you look at this, you've got Duplin County here, that's almost $1 billion, almost $1 billion. The study from 2 years ago was about 700 million. So these numbers are going up dramatically, absolutely dramatically. So let's go to the next slide. And this is slide 43. So from 2007 to 2015, we had 12 billion in clean energy economic development. Now it's 40 billion. Now, that's not 40 billion in direct solar installations or direct energy. That counts indirect as well. But we do have a huge amount of money spent directly on solar. Excuse me. I want to point something else out. We had an excellent solar tax rebate until the end of 2015 and beginning of 2016. And it's there in the third bullet point there. And basically what happened between 2007 and 2016 is that North Carolina taxpayers spent $322 million on tax rebates. And so all of the anti-solar people at the NCGA, the state legislature, were complaining about this. Oh my gosh, you gave away all this money and you gave away $322 million in tax rebates. But here's the thing, $529 million came back to the state coffers, not $529 million in economic activity. No. It was 12 billion in economic activity. But all of that money that was spent on tax rebates came back. Now, the numbers have changed over the years, and I'm not going to get into the complexities of it, but basically all those tax rebates have paid for themselves over and over and over. Because when you spend $1 billion on different types of rebates, but you have $40 billion worth of economic activity, it's really worth it. Now, unfortunately, despite that, we killed the solar tax credit. And I think what a lot of smart people said was, we don't really even need the tax credit anymore for utility scale solar. Besides, it's mostly Duke that, Duke builds a lot of the utility scale solar anyway, half last I looked. But basically, we need those tax rebates for citizens, for low income people. We could do programs like they do in other states, where you target low income people, you target multifamily housing, and you say, we're going to give a rebate to this type of people, this class of people, this income level of people. They're doing it in Illinois. They're doing it in more and more states all the time. So slide 44.
Hey, Nancy.
Yeah.
There are several questions.
Okay, sure. Let's get them.
I'm going to start with one that was, regarding a recent slide.
Yeah.
And Sasha, Duplin County is hog farm country.
Right.
Is that clean energy investment related to hog waste?
Yeah. I mean, it's the hog waste is an abomination. It's an abomination. And I want to mention something about, and Kathy, maybe you could talk a little bit too about when that hearing is, if people want to weigh in on that hearing, and you could put it in the chat box.
I'll do that. It's tonight.
Okay, it's tonight. But let me mention something about hog waste and why it's so awful. I did a report for NC Warren a few years ago when Duke University and Duke Energy were getting together to build a natural gas power plant on campus, on the Duke University campus, that was supposedly going to run on swine waste. Now, here's the thing. The swine are all the way over on the other side of the state. And this is information I'm happy to share with anybody who wants it. But that basically, here's the problem. Swine waste, methane, when you capture that swine waste, it's not just pure natural gas, which is what you need to run a power plant. It's all this other stuff too. Hydrogen sulfide is the worst. So you have all these impurities. So you have to clean out the impurities before you can use it for natural gas to run a power plant. Well, removing those impurities is unbelievably difficult and expensive. And what happens is, because hydrogen sulfide is so corrosive, it eats the equipment. And so I remember this one number from this report I did, that they expected this piece of equipment that was going to clean the hydrogen, the swine waste gas. They expected it to last for 20 years. It lasted for two. Why? Because the swine waste ate up this hydrogen sulfide, and it ate up the equipment. And so basically what you have is swine waste electricity is a joke. It costs probably 5 or 10 times more than solar electricity. So why are we doing this? I mean, we need an open, honest discussion about swine waste electricity and poultry electricity, because the dog don't hunt. And if people could actually see, if a lot of this stuff wasn't secret, which unfortunately it's secret, a lot of this information, it's just really an abomination. So here you've got a county like Duplin, which has $1 billion worth of solar investment. And yet, what are we doing? We're subsidizing all this awful, horrific swine waste. It's just, I have to say, as a researcher, as someone who's been working on these issues for 15 years, it was the most disgusting, heartbreaking research I've ever done in my life. So, got any other questions, Kathy?
Yeah, 2 more. Would you explain what net metering is?
Yes, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But yeah, let me skip that one, Kathy, and get into it here in the next slides. Anything else?
Bruce wants to know if companies push for scope 2 reductions, how will that impact RPS/solar?
I don't know what you mean by scope 2 reductions. Sorry.
I'll tell you, I'll ask Bruce to explain, and you can continue.
Okay. All right. So we'll get you to explain, Bruce, and we'll get that the next round.
Kathy, there was one more question about hog waste substituted for diesel fuel, if you can check that question.
Hog waste substituted for diesel fuel,
Yeah. How do you feel about biogas, swine waste for long-haul transportation, replacing diesel, industrial heat replacing fossil gas?
We had an issue here, which I dealt with as town council person in Boone. So a company wanted to sell the town of Boone that they were going to run our police cars, 20 of our 40 police cars, half of them, on renewable natural gas. Well, once I started really looking into it, it was like, this is ridiculous. And the only reason that they were able to do it is because they got ridiculous amounts of cost recovery from the utilities for this renewable natural gas. So here's the things to watch out for. Number one, what's it going to cost to convert the car or the vehicle? I know for our police cars, it was about $7,000 a car, and that's a lot of money. You can just buy you can buy a new electric vehicle for what, 40,000, something like that, 30, 40,000. The other thing to watch for is that, they tend to greenwash. And so as a chemist said, who finally convinced the town council to kill this, is that in theory, you can have renewable natural gas. You can make it from plants. But in practice, it just doesn't work. And so what this company was telling us actually was they were going to get us 100% renewable natural gas. It was going to be shipped here from Louisiana. They were going to drive it all the way to Boone, just so that Boone could say, we're running on renewable natural gas. Whereas really the renewable natural gas that they were selling, the vast majority of it is from swine waste. And so Dominion customers are dealing with this right now, a bunch of environmental groups in Virginia. And, the dog don't hunt. Now, I'm not a diesel expert. I'm not a truck expert. But I would say that the advances in electrification are profound. And that the people that I saw, that I interacted with, who were pushing police cars running on renewable natural gas, I think that because of the explosion in electric vehicles, I'd say that their prospects of selling these vehicles are like this. It's way, way, way down. So I would say be skeptical and look and align yourself, find people who are doing work on these issues and go work with them. Because most of the time, it's sort of like swine waste methane. Once you really look into it, it's almost laughably stupid. Okay, so let's go to slide 45, Andrew. Am I with you here? So slide 45, solar's challenges, real but achievable. And I want to point out in slide 46 here, a couple things to just watch for. Solar curtailment is happening in the West. Now, this is probably why Duke Energy is telling us now, they only want to give solar maximum value between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. or 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. when there's hardly any solar electricity generation. Okay, why? Well, what if we have too much solar? Well, that's only happening right now in states like California. So what curtailment is, this says California's curtailments of solar electricity generation continue to increase. Well, why? Because California right now is between 20 and 30% solar electricity. They have a lot. What are the states around them doing to game the system? Well, I can tell you what Arizona's doing, which is not very smart. And really, I mean, it should be illegal, but it's not, is that California is paying Arizona to take excess solar off their hands. And then what do Arizona utilities do? They dump their own solar and they burn coal because they make more money. And I wish I was kidding. I wish this was not the truth, but it is, unfortunately. And that's what's happening. And so this whole idea that we have too much solar coming in, well, that's only happening in a very, very few states that have a lot of solar. And once we have batteries and we can store that solar, it's not a problem. So here's Duke Energy trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist in a state like North Carolina where, hey, we don't even have very many rooftops. So why are we trying to kill? Why are we trying to hurt net metering in a state that we only have 25,000 rooftops, out of 3 million total in the United States, 3 million. So let's go to the next slide, which is 47. And this is a really interesting report that one of my students worked on, Aidan Malone. And, basically John Farrell is one of the best, most articulate, most knowledgeable solar experts in the country. young man in Minnesota who does incredible studies. And if you want to really learn this stuff, read John Farrell, sign up, listen to his podcast. So they did a study and they looked at the available solar roofs and they looked at the insolation. And basically, here's what they came up with. 30 million solar roofs, solar homes. And remember, we only have about 3 million solar installations in the United States. A small fraction of that is utility scale. But if you're just looking at the number of installations, the number, not the total capacity, right? Just the number of installations. So out of 3 million installations in this country, I'm just going to take a wild guess and say, you know, a few thousand are commercial scale or utility scale, but the 30 million, we could have 30 million solar homes, but we only have about 3 million. So it would create a lot of jobs and it would create a lot of energy savings. Why? Because you're not burning fuel. You're saving money on fuel. And look at the cost of fuel. The cost of natural gas is up doubled. It has doubled in 6 months, doubled. What do you think that's going to do to the cost of natural gas fired electricity? So the next slide, please, Andrew, 48.
Hey guys, I think we're off a slide.
Oh, are we? Okay, let's see. Andrew, let's see. Sorry about that. Andrew, can you go to slide 47? Are we off? Might have been my screw up. Is that the one that says 30 million solar homes, Andrew, 47? Oops, I can't hear you guys.
47 is 30 million solar homes.
Okay, very good. Well, let's go to slide 48. And this is really interesting and it's very recent. What's it say? Is it very? It's basically about the locational value of solar. The locational value of solar is essential to grid planning. Hello. I mean, value of distributed energy resources largely depends on 3 things: location, location, location. Yes. Okay, just imagine this. Let's just say that you live in a city, a big city, and the city's getting built out more and more and more, like Charlotte, okay? Well, let's just say that there's a lot of congestion. They call it grid congestion. The transmission lines can't handle any more electricity going through them. So what do? You put a nice big fat solar array right there close to the city, or maybe even in the middle of the city, maybe along a freeway like they do in Germany. Because why? Because when you put that generation close to load, it makes a huge difference. Here's what the utilities are doing all over the country, including Duke Energy, is they're trying to make what's called hosting capacity maps. In other words, not just the transmission congestion, but the distribution congestion. In other words, how much capacity is left in that distribution power line so that if you put solar in there, it would help things rather than hurt things. That is what we need. We need transparency, and we need to see those hosting capacity maps so that we can see where DER solar needs to go in. Hello. And then something that just really, honestly, profoundly bothers me is cost shift. Hello, cost shift. What's the cost shift of dumping pollution on vulnerable people? What's the cost shift when your loved ones are sick from coal ash? What's the cost shift when you refuse to allow people to cost effectively install solar on their own homes so that they can address climate change? What is the cost shift when you force customers to buy fossil fuels? What's the cost shift when people die of brain cancer from what looks like coal ash, hexavalent chromium? I mean, what's the cost shift here of all of this horrible, dangerous pollution that utilities have been dumping on us for a very long time? So my last section here, slide 49, I want to show people energy efficiency in North Carolina, because we're not doing that great. So let's move to slide 50, Andrew. This is an ACEEE report, and I love this one. I just Googled it, North Carolina, and ACEEE, and look what I come up with. Utilities need to revamp their energy saving efforts to meet climate goals. Yes, indeed. So let's go to slide 51. North Carolina and energy efficiency. Out of 20 points, possible points, we only have 3. We only have 3. Now, this is something that the North Carolina Utilities Commission could easily do something about, easily. And they could let us know. We need to have at least workshops on this, if not hearings, because we are taking that low hanging fruit and we're just letting it fall off the tree and rot on the ground. So slide 52 here. This is an old slide relatively old from EIA, as you can see up there. Average incremental annual electric energy efficiency spending in 2016 per customer. Look at Massachusetts, $128 a person. Look at North Carolina, we're at $13.90 per person. And I've got that in the next slide here from the exact chart. So you can see that we're just not doing that great. So the next slide here, slide 53, these are all from the ACEEE report on a few slides ago, these are all from the state scorecard and the links are in there. So look at this slide 53 here. You see that when you look at state energy efficiency spending, how do you measure it? You say you can talk about it in terms of total dollars, right? How many millions of dollars? Or you can talk about as a percentage of state revenues, right? So let's look at the top state there, Rhode Island. So that's a small state and they spent $104 million. And that was 7.58% of statewide electric revenues. Now let's look across at us, North Carolina. We spent 145 million, but we're much, much bigger state, way more people. And we only spent 1.14% of state electric revenues. I mean, look at a state like Massachusetts, okay, which is also smaller than us. And they spent $620 million to our $145 million. So let's go to the next slide with a few more details. And this is slide 54, and this is where I got the 1390. So this is electric efficiency program spending per capita. So here we are in North Carolina at $13.90 per person. Whereas if you look at these top states, you know, it's much, much higher. So the next slide, please. 55. This is natural gas efficiency, which usually kind of gets thrown under the bus, but as we're getting to be more and more, as we use more and more natural gas, that's more important. And you can see that relative Massachusetts and Rhode Island here are spending $182 and $123 per person, and we're spending $1.56. So let's go. I wanted to point a few other things out here as I'm just at the end. Next slide, 56. These are a couple things that I found just searching through the ACEEE report on North Carolina. And that is that we allow large industrials to opt out of energy efficiency, and so most of them do. Well, basically what this says right here is opted out load in North Carolina represents 40 to 45% of industrial and large commercial load. So in other words, 40 to 45% of our potential energy efficiency savings from large commercial and industrial users and consumers of energy, 40 to 45% of that load is just opting out. Now that is bad policy, and that is indeed why they gave us a -1 for that. And then here we go in North Carolina. This is something that I didn't realize, and it was something that perhaps, you know, all of us clean air people want to follow up on. And that is that the NC Division of Air Quality produces an annual report that quantifies reductions in GHGs from avoided generation due to energy efficiency. Because remember, you're not, you know, generating fossil fuel electricity, and other non-emitting power sources that receive credit. So basically we have someone, an agency, who is tracking that for us. So let's go here to slide 57. I'm going to end on these. Sorry, might go a little over. So slide 57, let's look at these current issues. Slide 58. And this is from the NCUC order. So basically, the NCUC is trying to figure out how to cut emissions from the law that they passed, 70% by 2030. I also want people to realize that because we passed the Clean Smokestacks Act, and I've got a link in there, actually, they're already partway there. I think they're already about 30% there, because due to the Clean Smokestacks Act, we've already done a lot of emissions reduction. Okay, and Duke needs to submit a CO2 reduction plan by the end of 2022. This is another great thing to get involved in. Duke Energy's current NCIRP has a lot of new gas plants, about 8 gigawatts, but the short-term plan, as I've got highlighted here in yellow, has no new natural gas. And I would, I'm a betting person, I would say within 5 years, no one in their right mind is going to be building natural gas plants. Everyone's going to be shutting them down because climate change is getting worse and worse. It's obvious. Natural gas cost is going up. 90% of our natural gas is fracked. All those wells deplete very quickly. You need to drill more and more and more wells. And so it ain't going to happen. And here's something that I'm finding very amusing is that the NCUC is now allowing interveners to talk about the cost and long-term risk and availability of natural gas, because I wrote testimony on this when I first got to North Carolina in 2014 and 2015, and some in 2016, and they never even allowed it to be admitted into the record. They never allowed it into the record. So I want to make a point here about this for advocates. You start by asking, would this be in the record? Why don't we have EJ in the record? Why don't we include jobs? Why don't we include air pollution? Why don't we include health and environmental damages? You'll get no, 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 and then you'll get yes. So moving on here to slide 59, on the Southeast Energy Exchange market, this is a press release from SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association. And basically what they say, it's a fake market. It's a fake energy. It's a fake RTO ISO. And on the next slide here, I'll show you what that is. Basically, what the purpose of an energy exchange market or an ISO or an RTO, independent system operator, regional transmission operator, is to allow you to share electricity. Because when you can share electricity, first of all, you don't need to build as many power plants, right? And second of all, renewable energy is more effective because you can share it across a wider territory, across a wider geographic area, so that maybe it's not windy in North Carolina, but it's windy in Delaware, or it's not windy, it's not sunny in North Carolina, but it's windy in West Virginia or whatever. So the next slide here, slide 60, shows you what is an ISO or an RTO, and those are regions that share power. Now, I like this map because the gray areas show you where we don't really have markets. We don't have those regional transmission markets. Why are they important too? Because they give you transparency. Because I can go to any one of those markets, MISO, CAISO, ERCOT, Southeast Power Pool, New York ISO, ISO Northeast, and I can see what power costs every minute of every day, every hour. We don't have that. We don't know. We have to beg Duke, and then we have to wait for a docket so that they'll tell us. So slide 61 is so that you can see these RTOs. The reason why they are so influential is because a lot of our power in this country is through RTOs, 60%. And then slide 62, and again, I'm sorry to go over here, folks, but here's where we need advocacy. We need advocacy in net metering. So let's go to the next slide, slide 63. These are some quotes from Rory McElmoyle at App Voices. Rory is one of the best energy analysts in the state, really, very knowledgeable guy. And basically he says, hey, why are you making peak energy hours when solar doesn't shine, when solar doesn't produce. I mean, this is silly. I also want to point out that there are a number of different players who approved of this, but there are a number that didn't also. So let's go to the next slide, 64. And this is another area where advocacy is needed, called third party. It's a little complicated to explain, so I'm not going to do it here. Maybe we could do something in the spring. But basically what net metering rules is that's the technology, I'm sorry, third party allows another entity other than the incumbent utility to sell electricity. Not going to get into that beyond to say that. And then net excess generation matters there, slide 65. Okay, slide 66 here, Andrew. What can we do? I've got my final couple slides here. Slide 67, get involved in net metering. Don't let Duke Energy kill retail net metering. Now, there are groups that have already given their okay. They are nice people. They are smart people. They are good people. I don't agree with them. SEIA approved it. Southern Alliance for Clean Energy approved it. Sunrun approved it. Vote Solar approved it. Southern Environmental Law Center approved it. I don't think that's right. I think that if we kill retail net metering, basically what we're going to see is we have 25,000 solar roofs, and that's going to grow very, very, very slowly. So I don't think that's right. There's a bunch of great reports that I put some links into here on slide 67. And then if we go to slide 68, the other thing I wanted to put in here is the carbon plan. Duke's carbon plan, wake up and smell the methane. In 2014, which is 7 years ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us why methane was a more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2, far more powerful. That's a long time ago. Let's wake up and smell the planet. And then there's a lot of states that are including the cost of carbon. I don't think that this is not a complete list. New York, Minnesota, Illinois, and Colorado. Why don't we have any EJ requirements, energy justice, or even assessment? Lots of states are doing that, and there's a link. And then other ways to finance solar, PACE, community choice aggregation, community solar. So what needs to change? Well, we need to push these guys. Slide 69. Slide 70, we have to count everything, because if we don't, we're just going to be destroying the future. So slide 71 here, I'm sorry again to go over everyone, but thank you so much for sticking with this and for listening. Apologies for going over, and I hope folks learned something worth knowing, and I'm happy to stick around and answer questions as long as people want to stay.